Tiny Tim became an overnight sensation in the late 1960s with his falsetto rendition of Tiptoe Through the Tulips, but his fame faded almost as quickly as it arrived. Financial problems forced him to continue performing despite suffering from severe heart disease. In September of 1996, he suffered a heart attack after a concert but ignored doctors' warnings to stop performing. Just 2 months later, he collapsed on stage during another performance, suffered another massive heart attack, and died the following day. Here's some footage of one of nature's most gruesome mating rituals. Male honeybees, known as drones, die immediately after mating when their reproductive organ is ripped from their body, tearing open their abdomen and killing them within seconds. During her only mating flight, a queen typically mates with 10 to 20 drones, though some mate with 40 or more, storing enough sperm to fertilize eggs for the rest of her life. In 1859, English settler Thomas Austin released just 24 European rabbits into the Australian wilderness to hunt them for sport. But with few natural predators and ideal conditions, the population exploded into billions within decades, devastating native ecosystems, stripping vegetation, causing massive soil erosion, and becoming one of the worst invasive species disasters in history. Erling Haaland spent roughly $134,000 to buy the only surviving copy of a rare 1594 edition of Heimskringla, one of Norway's oldest printed history books, preventing the 430-year-old volume from disappearing into a private collection. Instead, he donated it to the library in his hometown of Bryn, where it will be preserved and put on public display permanently so future generations can see one of the country's rarest surviving historical treasures. These tiny stone stars are actually prehistoric fossils. They're the preserved stem segments of sea lilies, marine animals called crinoids that lived hundreds of millions of years ago. When the stems broke apart, they left behind these perfectly star-shaped fossils. This child's robe, made in China over 150 years ago during the Qing dynasty, was known as a 100-family robe. Families throughout a village each donated a small patch of fabric, with every piece symbolizing protection, blessings, and good fortune. So the child quite literally wore the support of the entire community. This massive Olmec stone head lay buried beneath the jungle for centuries until archaeologists uncovered it in the 1950s at San Lorenzo, Mexico. Weighing up to 20 tons, these colossal stone heads were carved over 3,000 years ago and hauled for miles without wheels or animals. To this day, no one knows exactly how the Olmec moved them or why so many of them were deliberately buried. Oliver Tree has reportedly died after 2 helicopters collided mid-air over Rio de Janeiro, Brazil on June 14, 2026. The 32-year-old musician spent years building a career around chaos, fake retirements, outrageous stunts, and songs about heartbreak, self-destruction, and disaster. This time, however, the catastrophe was very real. The helicopters crashed into an electric vehicle storage yard, where the wreckage ignited a massive fire that spread to at least 20 cars. All 6 people on board the aircraft were killed. Videos appearing to show the collision and aftermath have begun circulating online, with many outlets declining to share the footage because of its graphic nature. Oliver released a new album just a few weeks ago and was in the middle of a world tour. Best known for viral hits like Life Goes On and Miss You, he died just 2 weeks before his 33rd birthday as investigators worked to determine what caused the tragic collision. It's been over a week since the tragic death of Oliver Tree, so here's everything we know so far. On June 14th, the 32-year-old singer was killed when 2 helicopters collided over Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, killing all 6 people on board. One of the helicopters crashed into a car dealership and burst into flames, setting multiple vehicles on fire. One of the most disturbing details came from a witness who said he saw a passenger jump from one of the helicopters after the collision but before it struck the ground. Authorities never confirmed who that person was, but if the account is accurate, it means at least one victim may have been aware of what was happening in the final moments before the crash. The accident was reportedly so severe that Oliver Tree was left unrecognizable, with authorities forced to rely on dental records because of the condition of his remains after the fire. Among the other victims were Argentine YouTuber Gatsby, music producer Lucas Froda, director Lucas Vignali, and both pilots. In a chilling twist, another producer who was reportedly supposed to be on the flight backed out last minute because he was afraid of flying. More than a week later, investigators still haven't determined exactly what caused the collision. Authorities are reviewing reviewing flight records, radio communications, radar data, and the movement of both helicopters in the moments before impact. While some reports have suggested possible human error, investigators have not released an official cause and have warned that the investigation could take years to complete. This uncertainty has fueled widespread speculation about what actually happened. In a recent interview, the father of Argentine YouTuber Gatsby, one of the victims alongside Oliver Tree, said he personally believes the crash was an attack rather than an accident. He didn't provide evidence for this claim, and authorities have not indicated foul play was involved. However, the comments have resonated with many people online, where theories continue to circulate that there may have been something more going on than a simple aviation accident. For now, investigators have not found evidence supporting these claims, but until an official cause is released, the questions surrounding the crash are likely to continue. Since the crash, Oliver's remains have been returned to California, and his family has begun carrying out one of his final wishes. Rather than leaving his wealth to relatives, he wanted to use it to support artists through a foundation called Dr. Oliver Tree's extremely epic grant for baby geniuses, which is now being created in his honor. Some of Tom Holland's darkest experiences have happened both on and off screen. His breakout role came in The Impossible, based on a family that survived the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, which killed more than 225,000 people across 14 countries. 7-year-old Holland met the real family and heard firsthand what they endured. Years later, he starred in The Crowded Room as a mental case inspired partly by Billy Milligan, who claimed to have 24 different personalities, and became the first person acquitted of major crimes in the US due to dissociative identity disorder. Holland said the psychologically intense role left him so emotionally drained that he took a year off from acting. Around the same period, he was confronting his own dark relationship with alcohol. After attempting Dry January in 2022, Holland realized he was constantly thinking about alcohol, struggled to socialize without it, and felt he needed to drink to relax after stressful days on set. He became concerned by just how difficult it was to stop, later admitting, "I was definitely addicted to alcohol." Holland eventually pushed himself to stay sober for 6 months, saying he became noticeably happier, healthier, and better able to handle problems. He ultimately quit drinking altogether and has remained sober ever since. Steven Hillenburg, the legendary creator of SpongeBob SquarePants, was a former marine biology teacher who turned his love of ocean life into one of the most successful animated TV shows in history. But in 2017, he revealed he'd been diagnosed with ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease, a progressive neurodegenerative disease that slowly destroys the body's ability to move, speak, and eventually breathe. Hillenburg continued working on SpongeBob during his illness before dying in California in 2018 at the young age of 57. The character he created went on to outlive him, becoming one of the most recognizable animated figures in the world. Dutch artist and inventor Bart Jansen became known for turning dead animals into functioning drones after mounting motors and propellers onto taxidermied pets and wildlife. His most famous creation was Orville, a pet cat that was killed by a car and later transformed into a flying drone because Jansen said he wanted to give him a new life. He's also created drone versions of an ostrich, a shark, and several other animals, and later announced plans to build an airborne drone from a dead cow. Jansen says the projects are meant to blur the line between life, death, and technology. In June of 2023, in the North Atlantic Ocean near the Titanic wreck site, Pakistani businessman Shahzada Dawood and his 19-year-old son Sulman were among those killed when the Titan submersible suddenly imploded. Nearly 9 months later, after recovery efforts at extreme depths, small amounts of human remains were returned to the family. Identified through DNA testing, the material was described by Shahzada's wife as the slush that was left delivered in 2 small shoeboxes. Due to the conditions of the implosion in the environment, the remains were limited and heavily fragmented, with some of the recovered material being mixed together, meaning it could not be definitively attributed to one specific individual. In Rochester, New York in 2022, a woman installed a hidden trail cam at her mother's grave after noticing it kept being disturbed. The footage soon captured her father, the woman's ex-husband, returning to the cemetery and urinating directly on the grave multiple times per week. The behavior had been going on for at least several months, and likely closer to a year or more before it was caught on camera. In multiple clips, his partner could be seen waiting nearby in a car while he carried out the act. Police were contacted, but the case fell into a gray area legally, with any charges depending on local cemetery regulation. The situation drew attention for the sustained, deliberate nature of the acts, targeting the grave long after the relationship had ended. Former child star DeVay Chase became famous in the early 2000s for voicing Chihiro in Spirited Away and Lilo in Lilo and Stitch, while also terrifying audiences as Samara in The Ring. She quickly became one of Hollywood's most recognizable young actors, appearing in major films and television shows before largely disappearing from the spotlight. According to recent reports, she spent years struggling with personal problems, financial instability, and declining health. Friends claimed she became increasingly isolated, while reports alleged she'd been living in poverty and even spending time in Los Angeles' Skid Row area in the months before her death. Her boyfriend later said she'd been suffering from severe malnutrition before being hospitalized with meningitis and multiple serious blood infections. The actress reportedly weighed less than 80 pounds by the time she was hospitalized. The infections reportedly progressed to sepsis, causing multiple organ failure, and Chase died on June 16, 2026 at just 35 years old. On March 4, 1994, beloved comedian John Candy died of a heart attack at the young age of 43 while filming for Wagons East in Durango, Mexico. Candy long feared he would suffer the same fate as his father, who had also died of a heart attack at a young age. After years of struggling with weight issues, heavy smoking, and earlier drug use, Candy died in his sleep in the middle of production for the film. His death stunned Hollywood, and he was so beloved that when his body was returned to Los Angeles, police took the extraordinary step of shutting down the notoriously busy 405 freeway so his funeral procession could pass uninterrupted, a tribute typically preserved for presidents and other heads of state. On September 24, 2005, Mark Dixie spent his 35th birthday drinking at a pub in London before walking the streets with a knife. In the early hours of the morning, he followed 18-year-old Sally Bowman as she returned home and stabbed her repeatedly outside her own front door. Her body was discovered just steps from safety. Dixie evaded arrest for 9 months until he was involved in an unrelated pub fight, and his DNA was entered into the national database, where it directly matched evidence from the murder scene. In 2006, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 34 years. Actor Jesse Eisenberg donated one of his kidneys to a complete stranger in 2025 after learning more about the organ shortage crisis. During the operation, doctors discovered the intended recipient had become too sick to receive the transplant, so Eisenberg's kidney was redirected to a different stranger elsewhere in the country. He never learned the recipient's identity, recovered without major complications, and later said he had no regrets, joking that he wished he had more kidneys to give. In 1943, Swiss chemist Albert Hofmann became the first person to intentionally take LSD after accidentally being exposed to it days earlier in a laboratory. Believing the amount was insignificant, he swallowed 250 micrograms, a dose now considered to be extremely powerful. Within a few hours, Hoffman was plunged into a waking nightmare. He experienced overwhelming hallucinations, felt his body and mind breaking apart, became convinced he'd been poisoned, and feared he was permanently losing his sanity. At one point, he believed he was dying and that the world around him had transformed into something sinister and unrecognizable. The 6-hour ordeal became the first documented LSD trip in history and is now remembered as Bicycle Day, after the ride home during which the drug's effects had reached their terrifying peak. Before becoming one of Hollywood's toughest actors, Jon Bernthal spent years getting into violent street fights, was arrested multiple times, and later admitted he was headed down roads he shouldn't have survived. In 2009, while walking his dog, he punched a man during a confrontation, knocking him unconscious after the man's head struck the pavement. Handcuffed to a police station bench, Bernthal was told that if the victim died, he could spend the rest of his life in prison. The man ultimately survived, but Bernthal said the incident permanently changed him, leading him to abandon violence and channel that side of himself into acting instead. He's since revealed his nose has been broken about 15 times from a lifetime of fights and physically demanding roles. In 2019, Zhao Jingqian fell headfirst from a warehouse roof while rescuing a trapped toddler, using his own body to absorb the impact and save the child's life. After briefly waking from a CT scan to ask, "Is the child okay?" he slipped back into a coma with severe brain damage. His wife, Song Mei, quit her job to care for him full-time, and after doctors suggested stimulating his feet, she began biting his toes every day for nearly 7 years after noticing it triggered a response. In June 2026, Zhao finally turned to her and whispered, "Song Mei, I love you." During writing therapy, the only word he can currently write is her name. Between 2016 and 2022 in Germany, reality TV star Theresia Fischer underwent 2 leg-lengthening surgeries that increased her height by about 14 centimeters or 5.5 inches. The procedure required doctors to break her leg bones and implant adjustable metal rods, slowly extending them over time as new bone formed. Although the surgeries achieved the desired height, Fisher later said the process left her in constant pain during the recovery and emotionally scarred, revealing she felt pressured into it by a former partner and ultimately came to regret altering her body so drastically. Between 1975 and 1979, Cambodia was controlled by the Khmer Rouge regime, a brutal communist regime that targeted and executed educated people, including doctors, teachers, and anyone seen as intellectual. During this time, OB/GYN Dr. Hein S. Nagor was forced into labor camps and survived by hiding his medical background, knowing it would mean certain death if discovered. When his wife went into labor and required a life-saving C-section, Nagor faced an impossible choice: perform the procedure and expose himself, or stay silent and let his wife die. He chose not to risk it, and both his wife and their unborn child died during childbirth. In 2002, Michael was staying at a hotel in Berlin when he dangled his 9-month-old son blanket over his 4th-floor balcony. Jackson claimed he was simply excited and wanted to show off his baby to the fans below, but the media was quick to criticize Michael's parenting skills and life-threatening behavior. Jackson later apologized, stating that it was a mistaken judgment and that he didn't mean to endanger his son. Blanket is now 21 years old and rarely makes public appearances. Michael became increasingly reliant on medication after being prescribed painkillers following the 1984 burn incident. Over time, it expanded into a combination of sedatives, anti-anxiety drugs, and sleep aids that he depended on just to function. He reportedly used aliases to obtain additional prescriptions without raising suspicion. But eventually, he lost the ability to sleep naturally, going long stretches without real rest unless he was chemically put under. In his later years, his physician Conrad Murray was administering propofol at home, effectively replacing sleep with anesthesia, leaving his entire routine built around cycles of medication and sedation. Before becoming an actor, Danny DeVito worked as a beautician in New Jersey, where one of his regular clients suddenly died. Her family specifically requested him to prepare her for the funeral, asking him to wash, set, and style her hair inside the coffin. After that, he began taking on similar work at a local funeral home, styling the hair of corpses and helping present bodies for open casket viewings, before eventually leaving that world behind to study acting at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. In 1928 in Los Angeles, a woman named Christine Collins was reunited with a boy police claimed was her missing 9-year-old son, Walter. She immediately insisted the child definitely wasn't hers, pointing out physical differences and even dental records that clearly didn't match. But instead of investigating, authorities instantly accused her of being unstable and had her involuntarily committed to a mental asylum. Months later, it was revealed the boy was an imposter, and her real son was likely murdered by serial killer Gordon Northcott. The case exposed major police corruption and later inspired the 2008 film Changeling. After becoming the most famous child star in the world through Home Alone, Macaulay Culkin spent years spiraling out of the spotlight. He became trapped in a bitter legal battle with his parents over control of his fortune, and later admitted to struggling with drugs and heavy drinking, while tabloids became obsessed with photos of his alarmingly thin appearance, constantly pushing rumors that he was addicted to heroin or even close to death, claims he consistently denied. For years, the former child star became more known for looking sick and gaunt than for the blockbuster movies that made him an icon. And in 2017, he met Brenda Song, someone who could relate to his struggles that stemmed from child acting. Over the following years, Culkin appeared significantly healthier and more stable, eventually crediting Brenda and their family life with giving him purpose again. The two later had children together, and during his Hollywood Walk of Fame speech, he told her, "You've given me all my purpose again. You've given me family." Mike Tyson later admitted that he took his famous cameo role in The Hangover while struggling with a severe cocaine addiction, saying he accepted the job mostly for drug money and was so intoxicated he barely remembered agreeing to it. The same year the film was released, Tyson's 4-year-old daughter Exodus tragically died after a treadmill power cord wrapped around her neck at the family's home in Phoenix. Tyson later recalled arriving at the hospital hungover and so overwhelmed with grief that his first instinct was to grab a gun and, quote, go crazy. He said seeing other parents quietly coping with their own dying children is what stopped him, and that Exodus's death ultimately became the turning point that led him to get sober. Tyson later said that had he not gotten clean, he likely would have died himself. In 1978, after North Korean commandos attempted to assassinate South Korean President Park Chung-hee, Unit 684 was secretly created in South Korea to infiltrate the North and kill leader Kim Il-sung. The 31 recruits, many reportedly criminals or men promised money and pardons, were sent to a remote island where they endured years of brutal training involving extreme physical punishment, starvation, and harsh survival exercises that killed 7 members before the mission ever even began. When relations between between the two Koreas unexpectedly improved and the assassination mission was suddenly abandoned, the remaining 24 men realized they had effectively become disposable secrets. In 1971, they mutinied, killed several of their guards, hijacked a bus towards Seoul, and exchanged gunfire with the military before most of the unit died in a final shootout and grenade explosion. The 4 surviving members were later captured, court-martialed, and executed. Before becoming famous as Dracula, Saruman, and Count Dooku, Christopher Lee witnessed the last public execution in France. In 1939, while visiting Paris as a teenager, he joined a crowd gathered outside a prison to watch convicted serial killer Eugene Weidman be executed by guillotine. Lee later recalled the atmosphere as disturbing, describing spectators climbing onto roofs just for a glimpse of the execution. Because the crowd became so unruly and the spectacle was described as shameful, the French government banned executions immediately following Weidman's death. During the Chechen Wars, Surgeon Kasan Bayev was reportedly the only doctor serving nearly 80,000 civilians in parts of war-torn Chechnya. As artillery strikes and bombings flooded makeshift hospitals with casualties, Bayev often worked for days without sleep, performing amputations, emergency brain surgeries, and other life-saving procedures with little anesthesia and makeshift medical tools. During one particular 48-hour period, he reportedly carried out 67 amputations and 8 brain surgeries. Refusing to choose sides, he treated wounded Chechen fighters, Russian soldiers, and civilians alike, leading to both sides accusing him of helping the enemy and threatening him with death. Before he became Wolverine, Hugh Jackman was a struggling actor working kids' birthday parties as a clown named Coco, earning about $50 a gig. He's admitted he didn't even know any real magic tricks and was once told by a 6-year-old, "You're terrible." Jackman has said those early performances forced him to learn how to command a room, handle rejection, and keep entertaining no matter what, skills that would later define his stage and film career. In 1946, French designer Louis Réard named the bikini after Bikini Atoll, where the United States had just conducted atomic bomb tests. He chose the name deliberately, claiming the revealing swimsuit would have an explosive cultural impact similar to the atomic blast that had just shocked the world. Sylvester Stallone wrote the script for Rocky in about 3 days after watching underdog boxer Chuck Wepner go the distance with Muhammad Ali. At the time, Stallone was struggling financially and reportedly had less than $200 in his bank account. Studios offered to buy the script but wanted a major star in the lead role. Stallone refused any offers unless he could play Rocky himself. He took a significantly smaller payday to secure the role, a gamble that paid off when Rocky won the Academy Award for Best Picture and launched his career. Nancy Guthrie, the 84-year-old mother of Today Show host Savannah Guthrie, was last seen when her family dropped her off at her home in Arizona on the night of January 31st, 2026. By the following morning, she was gone. Concern quickly grew when she failed to show up for church on Sunday morning, something her friends described as highly out of character, prompting them to contact her family. Inside her home, her car, phone, and daily medication were all left behind, a detail investigators described as especially alarming, considering her limited mobility and reliance on those medications. Police stated she had no history of wandering, confusion, or cognitive decline, making it highly unlikely she would have left on her own, especially at night. Despite the apparent urgency of the situation, there were no publicly reported signs of forced entry or a struggle, only deepening the unease surrounding how she disappeared without a trace. Investigators later described the scene inside the home as very concerning, saying they believe she didn't leave voluntarily and that the case should be treated as a potential crime. Authorities have since collected DNA evidence, involved multiple agencies, and are reviewing tips and nearby surveillance footage, but as of now, no suspect or confirmed lead has been announced. The results of Michael Jackson's autopsy report were nothing short of disturbing. He was largely bald with only sparse hair remaining, the result of burns and repeated cosmetic procedures, as he'd been wearing a wig in public for years. His scalp also showed scarring consistent with past injuries. He had multiple cosmetic tattoos, including permanent eyeliner and lip liner, likely done to maintain his appearance without daily makeup. His skin also showed signs of vitiligo alongside extensive cosmetic alteration. His arms were marked with numerous puncture wounds, consistent with frequent injections over time. Toxicology findings showed multiple drugs in his system and partially dissolved pills in his stomach, indicating recent ingestion. The cause of death was ruled acute propofol intoxication, a powerful surgical anesthetic. In the final months of his life, Michael was given propofol regularly inside his home to induce sleep, essentially relying on anesthesia instead of natural slumber. His personal physician, Conrad Murray, was later convicted of involuntary manslaughter for administering the drug outside of proper medical care. Just recently, Ed Sheeran revealed he'd been dealing with shingles for about a month, a painful viral infection caused by the reactivation of the chickenpox virus. The outbreak affected his scalp, causing burning nerve pain and blistering rashes severe enough that he shaved his head to manage it. Shingles attacks nerve pathways in the skin, and when it spreads across the scalp, even light contact can cause intense burning. Hair can trap heat, irritate the lesions, and make treatment difficult, so shaving it off helps reduce constant pain and allows medication to be applied directly. While not usually fatal, shingles can leave lasting nerve damage, with some people experiencing chronic pain long after the rash disappears. In Istanbul, Ali Sifsi suffered a catastrophic head injury while confronting a burglar, leaving a large section of his skull fractured and missing, with parts of his brain left dangerously exposed. Emergency surgery stabilized him, but a huge portion of his skull could not be saved. To rebuild it, surgeons performed detailed scans of his remaining skull and designed a patient-specific implant, 3D printing a curved titanium plate to precisely replace the missing bone. During reconstruction, the metal implant was secured directly to his skull, effectively acting as a permanent substitute for the lost bone, protecting his brain while permanently altering the structure of his head. In 2013, in Los Angeles, California, 15-year-old Paris Jackson was hospitalized after a serious self-harm attempt. It came 4 years after the 2009 death of her father, Michael Jackson, during a period where she was dealing with intense grief, constant media attention, online harassment, and widespread public speculation that she wasn't biologically his daughter. She was placed under psychiatric care following the incident, marking one of the lowest points in her life after losing her father. When Michael died in 2009 in Los Angeles, it was revealed his finances were far worse than people realized. Despite his global fame, he was reportedly $500 million in debt, tied to massive loans, legal costs, and the upkeep of assets like Neverland Ranch. His death triggered a complex financial collapse behind the scenes, forcing his estate into an immediate battle to stabilize what he left behind. Immediately after his death, Michael's body was held for weeks during autopsies and investigations, and kept in a private mausoleum as family disputes and legal issues delayed the funeral. His public memorial at Staples Center drew millions, ending with his daughter Paris Jackson breaking down in tears in one of the only times she ever spoke publicly.
Ever since I was born, Daddy has been the best father you could ever imagine. And I just wanted to say I love him so much.
But even after he was finally laid to rest more than 2 months later, his death triggered years of lawsuits, accusations, and renewed abuse claims, including those reignited by the documentary Leaving Neverland. Instead of closure, everything around him only grew more disputed, leaving behind a legacy that's still being argued over long after his death. Eminem was stalked by the same man who broke into his properties 3 times over 6 years, repeatedly reaching him despite arrests and court orders. In 2019, the stalker broke into one of Eminem's former homes and told the new homeowner he was looking for his brother Marshall. In 2020, he escalated by entering Eminem's actual residence through an unlocked entry point while Eminem was asleep, later telling police he was there to kill him. After being arrested and convicted, the man returned again in 2024, once more breaching Eminem's property. Court records show the break-in weren't the result of sophisticated planning, but repeated exploitation of access points and timing, highlighting how even high-level security measures can fail against persistent obsession. Eminem was unharmed, but prosecutors described the pattern as escalating and dangerous. A mummified carrier pigeon found inside a UK chimney in 1982 was carrying an encrypted World War II message from 1944 that's never been decoded. The pigeon likely died mid-mission during Britain's wartime communications and remained sealed in the chimney for nearly 40 years. Attached to its leg was a capsule holding a coded strip of letters and numbers believed to be connected to D-Day operations. Despite repeated attempts by historians and codebreakers, the message's meaning and destination remain unknown. Britain's intelligence agency GCHQ has confirmed the cipher is still unsolved and publicly asked for help deciphering it, leaving whatever information the pigeon was carrying permanently undelivered. This is the face of 87-year-old World War II veteran and daylily horticulturist Leo Sharp, who was pulled over in Michigan in 2011 after appearing confused and disoriented. A search of his vehicle uncovered more than 400 pounds of cocaine, revealing that he'd secretly spent years working as a high-level courier for Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. Because he looked so harmless and was rarely questioned, Sharp transported massive quantities of cocaine across the U.S. before being caught. He later pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges and was sentenced to prison in his late late 80s, becoming one of the oldest cartel mules ever prosecuted. In 1951, the French town of Pont-Saint-Esprit was hit by a sudden outbreak of severe illness after residents ate bread from a local bakery. Around 250 people experienced intense hallucinations, convulsions, and severe paranoia, with some reporting visions of snakes crawling out of their bodies or being consumed by flames. Several victims jumped from windows or ran screaming through the streets, while others were restrained or sedated as hospitals quickly filled beyond capacity. At least 5 people died and dozens were committed to psychiatric institutions. Investigators later concluded the outbreak was most likely caused by ergot poisoning, a toxic fungus that can contaminate rye and produce effects similar to LSD, which many historians have also theorized may have contributed to the Salem witch trials. Chef Anthony Bourdain often described his life as something he wasn't supposed to still have. In the 1980s, while working as a chef in New York City, he fell into a severe heroin addiction, using daily, stealing from coworkers, and living in a constant state of physical and mental collapse. He later admitted he fully expected to die young during that period and was surprised he survived it at all. When fame arrived years later after writing Kitchen Confidential, Bourdain said that sudden success in many ways was more dangerous than addiction, giving him money, access, and non-stop travel that nearly pulled him back into self-destructive behavior. While filming No Reservations and Parts Unknown, he spent years moving through regions marked by executions, cartel violence, and war, repeatedly confronting death up close until he said it began to feel disturbingly ordinary. Even as his career thrived, Bourdain acknowledged that depression never truly left him, describing it as something that doesn't disappear but waits in the shadows, a statement that would take on a far darker meaning after he took his own life in 2018. In 2024, Detroit man Curtis Dixon helped a man he believed was blind and even tried to give him money despite being broke. The encounter was secretly filmed as part of a social media video by Zachary Dereniowski, whose content involves pretending to be vulnerable to test strangers' kindness. Curtis was given $1,000 and the video went viral, portraying him as exceptionally compassionate, and he was given $100,000 more in a follow-up video. But within a few weeks of the videos gaining traction, Dixon was targeted because of the attention and cash he had received. He was lured outside under the pretense of helping a woman with her broken-down car, ambushed, kidnapped, beaten, and forced to withdraw money out of ATMs. His attackers then tied him up, poured gasoline on his SUV, and set it on fire. Luckily, Dixon survived after being pulled to safety, and multiple suspects were arrested, including his own nephew, turning the case into a chilling example of how kindness can turn someone into a target and transform a good deed into a near-fatal outcome. When Tupac Shakur was shot and killed at the age of 25 in September of 1996, his longtime rival, the notorious B.I.G., was reportedly devastated. Despite their very public feud, multiple people close to Biggie said he cried when he heard the news and appeared genuinely shaken, telling friends, "Shit got effed up somewhere along the way, but that was my end." The two had once been close friends, but everything changed in 1994, when Tupac was robbed and shot 5 times at a New York recording studio. Tupac believed people close to Biggie knew about the attack, especially after Biggie released the song Who Shot Ya soon afterward. Biggie insisted he had nothing to do with it and said the song had been recorded long before the shooting, but the damage was done. The East Coast-West Coast rivalry, fueled by diss tracks, media pressure, and growing paranoia about being shot, turned them into bitter enemies. But behind the scenes, Biggie reportedly feared the violence had gone too far and worried he might be next. 6 months later, Biggie was shot and killed in Los Angeles by a drive-by shooting at the young age of 24. Both murders still remain unsolved to this day, turning one of hip-hop's most famous rivalries into one of its darkest tragedies. Eddie Murphy's childhood was shaped by sudden violence long before he became famous. When he was about 7 years old, his biological father, Charles Edward Murphy, was shot and killed during a domestic dispute involving his girlfriend. The killing abruptly removed his father from his life, leaving Murphy and his brother to grow up without him. The loss is rarely mentioned in discussions of his personal life, and Murphy himself has rarely addressed it publicly. In 2025, 35-year-old Michael Virgil died on board a Royal Caribbean cruise after allegedly being served more than 30 alcoholic drinks in a single day, according to a wrongful death lawsuit filed by his family. Court filings state that Virgil showed clear signs of severe intoxication before experiencing a violent outburst, during which he became disoriented and aggressive. Crew members restrained him as his condition worsened and he later collapsed. Virgil was eventually pronounced dead on board, and his body was stored in the ship's refrigerated morgue until the vessel returned to port. The Los Angeles County Medical Examiner later ruled his death a homicide, citing acute alcohol intoxication and restraint-related factors, and his family is seeking accountability from the cruise line for alleged over-serving and failures in response. John Cena holds the all-time record for the most Make-A-Wish visits by far, personally granting over 650 wishes for children with life-threatening illnesses. Many of these visits have taken place in intensive care units or hospice settings, oftentimes with children who would pass away weeks or even days later. Hospital staff have said Cena routinely stays far longer than scheduled, sitting with families after cameras are gone, letting kids talk about fear, death, or unfinished dreams while he stayed fully in character as their hero. He's never publicized these encounters himself and refuses to use them for branding, saying he sees them as his life's purpose rather than for charity. Cena has also privately supported veterans suffering from severe PTSD and traumatic brain injuries, including meeting wounded soldiers who believed their lives were over due to permanent disabilities. Several veterans later said those conversations with the wrestling legend single-handedly saved their life. Cena has consistently avoided receiving any public credit for these interactions. In 2022, Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, drowned off the coast of Okinawa while trying to save a woman, her child, and a U.S. soldier who were trapped in a violent rip current. Witnesses watched him jump into 6-foot waves and swim toward the struggling swimmers as the water twisted into a whirlpool. The soldier ultimately pulled the victims to safety, but Takahashi was overtaken by the current and vanished beneath the surf. His body was found 2 days later, still in snorkeling gear, and investigators confirmed he died during the rescue attempt. Anthony Olson spent 9 years being poisoned by chemotherapy for a cancer he never had. In 2011, doctors told the 21-year-old he had a deadly blood disorder and wouldn't live to see the next year without aggressive treatment. When a follow-up biopsy came back completely normal, he was told to ignore it because it meant the chemo was working. For nearly a decade, he endured transfusions, crippling side effects, and the emotional fallout of believing he was dying, all while the original diagnosis was wrong. Later reviews showed Anthony never even had cancer at any point, meaning every drop of chemotherapy and emotional turmoil was unnecessary. By the time the mistake was uncovered, the treatment had already reshaped his entire life. Millie Bobby Brown grew up with a hidden disability most fans never knew about. She was born with partial hearing loss in one ear, which eventually progressed into full deafness on that side, forcing her to learn how to act without relying on sound cues. But while she was quietly dealing with that, she was also facing something much darker. By the time she was 14, adults on the internet were circulating sexualized memes, fake stories, and even deepfake style edits of her. Harassment so disturbing that her family briefly pulled her off social media to protect her from the abuse. David Harbour has been brutally open about the darkest years of his life, marked by untreated bipolar disorder, alcoholism, and suicidal thoughts. At 25, he was hospitalized after a manic episode so severe, he believed he was receiving divine messages and might be the Antichrist. Before that, he'd spent years drinking heavily and spiraling through periods of violent depression. Harbour says he came frighteningly close to suicide before finally seeking treatment. He credits acting with giving him a way to channel the chaos, and now sober and in treatment, he says he enjoys consciousness way too much to ever go back. In 2010, 77-year-old rancher and hunting expert Don Alejo lived alone on a piece of land near Ciudad Victoria, Mexico, when a local cartel began demanding that he hand over his ranch, a common tactic in the region. They suddenly gave him 24 hours to vacate the property or be killed. Alejo told them he'd think about it, but instead, when the cartel left, he prepared for war. That night, he stayed up fortifying his home. He barricaded doors, moved furniture into firing positions, and set up multiple loaded rifles and shotguns at windows facing all approaches. At dawn, several cartel trucks rolled in expecting an easy takeover, but instead, the gunmen walked straight into a one-man ambush. From inside the house, Don Alejo opened fire with military-level precision. The firefight lasted nearly an hour, and by the time authorities arrived, they found 4 cartel members dead and at least 2 more critically wounded. The house was torn apart by gunfire, and Don Alejo was found inside, killed by return fire, still clutching his shotgun. Mexican Marines who processed the scene later said it was obvious he knew he wouldn't survive. He had prepared it as a final stand. Don Alejo's ranch was never taken by the cartel, and he became a national symbol of defiance in a region where most people are too terrified to fight back. Ariana Grande's life has been marked by unimaginable tragedy. In 2017, during her concert at Manchester Arena, a suicide bomber set off an explosive as fans were leaving the show. 22 people were killed, some of them children, and hundreds more were injured. The tragedy left Ariana with PTSD and deep survivor's guilt, something she said she'll never fully recover from. Just a year later, she lost her ex-boyfriend Mac Miller to an overdose, a loss that left her completely shattered. In 2019, she revealed how deeply those experiences affected her, sharing a brain scan that showed severe patterns of trauma, comparing it to a healthy brain and one with PTSD. Hers lit up the same way as the trauma scan, as she called it hilarious and terrifying, not a joke. In the years since, fans have noticed a drastic change in her appearance. Her once soft features now look sharper and hollowed, her frame thinner, her face at times hauntingly fragile. Whether from stress, age, or the weight of everything she's endured, Ariana's transformation feels like a visible reminder of how much she's had to carry. Simon Cowell once admitted he went so far with Botox and facial fillers that he no longer recognized his own face in photos. After years of cosmetic treatments gradually altered his features into something noticeably unnatural. Experts have suggested the buildup of filler can distort facial structure and even affect how fluid drains from the face, leaving a permanently swollen, tightened look that's essentially impossible to undo. The moment it hit him was when even his own son reacted to how different he looked, forcing him to confront just how far his appearance had drifted from what it once was. In 1912, French brothers Michael and Edmond Navratil, just 4 and 2 years old, were secretly abducted from their mother by their father and brought aboard the Titanic under fake names. When the ship began to sink, their father woke them up, brought them to the final lifeboat, and placed them inside, knowing he himself wouldn't survive. The boys made it to New York alone, unable to speak English and with no one knowing who they were, earning them the nickname the Titanic Orphans. Their identities remained a mystery until their mother recognized their photos in a newspaper and traveled across the ocean to reclaim them. This is the case against Michael Jackson and why people believe he was innocent. In 1993 in California, Michael Jackson was accused of sexually abusing 13-year-old Jordan Chandler, triggering one of the most invasive celebrity investigations ever. Authorities obtained a warrant to photograph and examine his body, attempting to match markings that were described by the boy. Reports later conflicted on how closely those descriptions aligned, becoming a key point of dispute. While the criminal case was developing, Jackson settled a civil lawsuit for over $20 million with no admission of guilt. After the settlement, Chandler declined to testify, leaving prosecutors without their central witness and resulting in no charges. Supporters saw this as a lack of evidence, while critics pointed to the payout as suspicious. Then in 2005, Jackson went to trial in Santa Maria, California over allegations involving 13-year-old Gavin Arvizo. Prosecutors claimed he groomed and abused the boy at Neverland Ranch, but the defense focused on inconsistencies in the family's timeline and credibility, claiming they had attempted to financially benefit from similar allegations before. After nearly 4 months of testimony and about 30 hours of deliberation, the jury acquitted Michael on all counts. The allegations left a lasting divide. Some former child visitors to Neverland have consistently denied any abuse and defended Michael, including Macaulay Culkin and Corey Feldman, along with other former young actors who have been very outspoken about abuse in the industry but say Michael never would have harmed them. Others point to multiple accusations over time and the 1993 settlement as reasons they believe otherwise. Michael denied all allegations up until his death in 2009, leaving the issue unresolved between a legal record that cleared him and a public debate that never settled. In March of 2019, rising Liverpool indie duo Hers were in the middle of their first US tour when tragedy struck. After performing a packed show in Phoenix, 24-year-old Stephen Fitzpatrick and 25-year-old Alden Lauding began their overnight drive to California with their tour manager. Just before 1 a.m., their van was hit head-on by a pickup truck driving the wrong way on Interstate 10. The collision erupted into flames, killing all 4 men instantly. Investigators reported no signs of braking and found an open container in the wrong-way driver's wreckage, suggesting alcohol may have been involved. Just hours earlier, the band had posted that their US tour was going swimmingly and that they were almost home. Their debut album, Invitation to Hers, would become their final record. In 2012, a Pennsylvania tree worker named James Valentine was trimming branches high off the ground when his chainsaw suddenly kicked back. In an instant, the blade plunged deep into his neck and shoulder, stopping just millimeters short of severing vital arteries. Miraculously, the chain jammed before it could spin further, but the saw itself remained embedded in his flesh. First responders found him conscious, with the chainsaw still lodged in place, and carefully stabilized it as he was airlifted to a trauma center. After hours of delicate surgery, doctors successfully removed the saw and repaired the massive tissue damage. Against all odds, Valentine made a full recovery. As a teenager, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's family was struggling so badly that they were evicted from their apartment in Hawaii. Not long afterwards, Johnson witnessed something that would haunt him for the rest of his life. His mother stepped out of her car on a busy highway and began walking towards oncoming traffic. Luckily, Dwayne sprinted after her and pulled her back just before she was hit. Years later, he revealed that the incident was a suicide attempt brought on by their dire situation, saying he never forgot how powerless he felt in that moment. In 2008, 39-year-old Stefan Miller was helping his cousin, Hollywood animal trainer Randy Miller, film a promo video with their 700-pound grizzly bear named Rocky, the same bear that starred alongside Will Ferrell in Semi-Pro that same year. But in an instant, the trained bear turned deadly. Without warning, Rocky suddenly lunged and bit deep into Stefan's neck, crushing his spine and severing an artery. He bled out within minutes as horrified crew members looked on. The bear, raised in captivity and for years considered to be safe, proved that even the most well-trained predator can revert back to its instincts in a heartbeat. At his 2011 Halloween party, Neil Patrick Harris served a cake designed to look like the rotting corpse of Amy Winehouse, complete with a mangled face, matted hair, blood-red frosting, a cigarette hanging from its mouth, and a tag reading, "The Corpse of Amy Winehouse." The photo resurfaced years later and drew massive backlash, especially since Winehouse had died from alcohol poisoning just 3 months before the party. Harris later apologized, calling it a regrettable choice. Many animal shelters refuse to let black cats be adopted around Halloween time, fearing they'll be tortured, sacrificed, or used as props in satanic rituals. Legendary illusionist Harry Houdini died on Halloween night in 1926 after his appendix burst, reportedly triggered when a fan punched him to test his strength. Before his death, he promised his wife he'd try to contact her from beyond the grave every Halloween, sparking seances that still continue to this day. In 1990, 32-year-old magician Joe Burris tried to outdo Houdini by being buried alive in a plexiglass coffin under 7 tons of dirt and cement. But the coffin collapsed instantly, crushing him to death on Halloween night, just like his idol. Statistically, Halloween is the deadliest day of the year for child pedestrians by far. Kids are 3 times more likely to be hit by a car while trick-or-treating than any other day of the year. 8-year-old Timothy Bryan died on Halloween night in 1974 after eating cyanide-laced candy given to him by his own father, who hoped to cash in on his life insurance policy. The Candyman case sparked the nationwide panic about poisoned Halloween candy, but it was the only true case of it happening ever recorded. In dozens of states, registered sex offenders are required by law to keep their porch lights off, avoid Halloween decorations, and have no contact with children on Halloween. Some cities even enforce curfews and random compliance checks on Halloween night. On an October night in 1997, students at Cornell University woke up to find a pumpkin impaled on the tip of the 173-foot spire of McGraw Tower. No one saw it placed there, no ropes, cranes, or ladders were ever found, and no one took credit. The pumpkin stayed perched for months, slowly rotting through the winter before being removed in March, an incredible Halloween mystery that remains unsolved to this day. During the filming of Sinister in 2012, the chilling home video scene showing a family being hanged nearly turned into a real-life tragedy. The stunt used actual harnesses and cables to simulate the hangings, but on the very first attempt, something went horribly wrong. One stunt performer slipped from their foot stirrups, causing the harness to immediately tighten around their neck. They were briefly severely choked before the crew had to cut them down, leaving everyone on set horrified as they'd almost witnessed an actual hanging. Director Scott Derrickson immediately shut down production, fired the stunt coordinator on the spot, and later admitted it was one of the scariest moments of his career, as a scene that was meant to terrify audiences had almost claimed a real life. In 1996, Karen Wetterhahn, a respected chemistry professor at Dartmouth, accidentally spilled just a few drops of dimethylmercury onto her latex gloves while conducting an experiment. The liquid seeped through in seconds, but she didn't know it, and for months she felt perfectly healthy. But then her speech began to slur, her balance faltered, and tests revealed her body contained 80 times the lethal dose of mercury. As the poison attacked her nervous system, she slipped into a coma, paralyzed but still aware, before dying 10 months after the accident at just 48 years old. In 2004, 23-year-old Florida teacher Deborah LaFave was arrested for having an illegal relationship with her 14-year-old student, in other words, raping him, after the boy's aunt caught them together and alerted his mother. What made the case even more disturbing was the public's reaction. Instead of outrage, much of the media fixated on her looks, calling her too pretty for prison, and treating the abuse like a scandalous affair rather than a crime. She pled guilty in 2005 and was sentenced to 3 years of house arrest, 7 years of probation, and lifetime registration as as a sex offender, but never spent a single day in prison. These were the final texts sent by Eddie Justice as he hid in the bathroom during the 2016 Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando, one of the deadliest mass shootings in American history. For 3 terrifying hours, the gunman roamed the club and executed anyone he saw, killing 49 and wounding 53. Victims tried to barricade doors, play dead, or call loved ones as SWAT teams surrounded the building. When police finally stormed in and killed him, the scene inside was pure horror. Bodies stacked all over, blood flooding the dance floor, and phones still ringing in the pockets of victims. In 1993, 16-year-old Marie Robard seemed like the perfect student, quiet, polite, straight A's, and deeply trusted by her single father, Stephen. They lived alone together, and friends said she appeared mature and responsible, even helping to care for him. But beneath the surface, Marie was quietly angry about one thing: a custody ruling that forced her to live with her dad instead of her mother. She grew more distant over time, secretly obsessing over how to change her situation. Then one night, her father suddenly collapsed in excruciating pain and died just hours later. Doctors believed it was a heart attack, and Marie played the role of a heartbroken daughter so well that nobody suspected a thing. Life moved on. Over a year passed before a friend came forward with a chilling confession. Marie had stolen barium acetate from her school's chemistry lab and mixed it into her dad's refried beans, calmly poisoning him just so she could live somewhere else. Investigators exhumed the body, confirmed the toxin, and charged her with murder. She was charged as an adult, convicted, and sentenced to 28 years in prison. But in a shocking twist, the honors student killer was paroled after just 7 years, walking free before she even turned 30. There's a long-running fan theory that Kevin McAllister from Home Alone grows up to become Jigsaw from Saw. The connection starts with Kevin's childhood obsession with elaborate traps, rigging blowtorches, swinging paint cans, and setting up nail-piercing steps as the early versions of Jigsaw's sadistic games. Both characters share the same piercing blue eyes and light hair, a calm, calculating demeanor, and a tendency to taunt or psychologically torment their victims. Kevin also grows up in the Midwest, while John Kramer's backstory places him in a similar American setting. Fans point out that Kevin shows no real remorse for the pain he inflicts. He laughs as the wet bandits are electrocuted, burned, and brutalized, and that his creativity seems to flourish under isolation and neglect, a psychological connection to Jigsaw's warped sense of justice. Even the iconic tricycle in Saw has been compared to Kevin's love for riding around on bikes in the Home Alone films. In this theory, the wet bandits weren't just burglars, they were Kevin's first test subjects. A North Carolina man was sentenced to nearly a decade in prison after one of the most disturbing neglect cases in recent history. For 6 to 8 months, 66-year-old Bonnie Kornhaber, who was bound to a wheelchair, lay helplessly on the floor of her cluttered, hoarded home after falling from her chair. Her husband Lewis admitted he never called for help because he was embarrassed about the conditions inside, leaving her to waste away surrounded by spoiled food, trash, and insects. When Bonnie finally told him she couldn't breathe, he ignored her pleas and watched TV in another room until she was dead. By the time first responders arrived, her body was covered in sores and filth, and Lewis was later convicted of second-degree murder and neglect, sealing his downfall after nearly 40 years of marriage. This was the mask worn by 51-year-old Vance Luther Bolter when he posed as a police officer and ambushed Minnesota State Senator John Hoffman and his wife Yvette at their Champlin home in June of 2025. Dressed in a tactical vest and carrying a flashlight, he knocked on their door in the middle of the night, and the moment Hoffman said, "You're not a cop," Bolter opened fire. Bullets tore through the couple in their doorway. John struck 9 times, Yvette 8, as their terrified daughter Hope hid just feet away while her mother shielded her body with her own. Somehow, both parents survived after hours of surgery, but they were left in critical condition. However, the carnage didn't stop there. Hours later, Bolter stormed into the home of Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman, executing she and her husband Gary as they both slept. Investigators later uncovered that he carried a disturbing hit list, targeting Democratic politicians and abortion providers, revealing the massacre as a carefully planned campaign of political terror, one that left Minnesota shaken to its core. 71-year-old George Hodgson Zinn became an unsettling side character in the aftermath of Charlie Kirk's assassination. As Kirk lay bleeding on stage, Zinn, a well-known Utah political agitator with a history of disruptive antics, told bystanders and police that he was the shooter. Officers quickly detained him, sparking confusion as viral footage showed the elderly man being hauled away in cuffs. But Zinn clearly didn't fit the profile. Within hours, investigators announced that he had no connection to the rooftop sniper. Instead, he was charged only with obstruction, echoing a bizarre past that included a 2013 arrest for allegedly emailing a bomb threat joke to the Salt Lake City Marathon. In 2013, neighbors in West Virginia notified police after spotting children locked inside a shed, and what investigators uncovered was one of the most horrific adoption scandals in recent history. Jean K. Whitefeather and her husband Donald Lance had adopted 5 black siblings only to subject them to forced labor, confinement, and racial abuse, essentially treating them as slaves. The kids were forced to dig holes with their bare hands, hardly fed, pepper sprayed for disobedience, and locked away at night with no lights or toilets. When their oldest daughter testified, she told them, "I'll never understand how you can sleep at night. You are monsters." In March 2025, a judge sentenced both of them to more than 150 years behind bars, declaring, "You brought these children to West Virginia, a place I know as almost heaven, and you put them in hell. This court will now put you in yours." Charlie Kirk has been shot in the neck. The 31-year-old conservative activist, founder of Turning Point USA and father of 2 young children, was speaking at Utah Valley University when gunfire erupted just 20 minutes into the event. The bullet tore through his neck, sending the crowd into a frenzy as people dove for cover and security dragged him from the stage, leaving a pool of blood on the ground where he'd been sitting. Kirk, who rose to prominence as an outspoken conservative speaker at college campuses, was immediately rushed to a hospital, but his condition remains undisclosed. The tragedy unfolded against a tense backdrop. Over 14,000 students and faculty had signed a petition demanding that the university cancel his appearance, citing his controversial rhetoric. Instead, he arrived under the banner of his American Comeback Tour, only for the event to end in violence. Authorities confirmed that an older man was arrested, with reports suggesting the shot came from a rooftop 200 yards away. Police immediately locked down the campus as the FBI joined the investigation, while political leaders from Donald Trump to Utah senators issued prayers in outrage. As of now, Charlie's death has not been confirmed, but given the severity of his injuries, the outlook is quite grim. For millions of children in the 1990s, Barney the dinosaur embodied love and innocence. But the man inside the costume, David Joyner, went down a radically different path after leaving the show. Joyner reinvented himself as a tantric sex therapist, charging clients $350 for 3 to 4 hour energy sessions that involved ritual baths, meditation, and full sexual contact. He openly admitted that helping women reach orgasm was part of his practice, describing it as a way to release blocked energy. In interviews, Joyner even gave credit to his years as Barney for preparing him for this role, saying the same ability to project love in a purple dinosaur suit helped him guide clients through intimate spiritual healing. Mike Tyson has openly admitted that he often had sex shortly before his fights, sometimes immediately before stepping into the ring. He explained he would bang groupies in the bathrooms and locker rooms to calm him down and apparently prevent him from murdering his opponent during the fight. At the 2004 Athens Olympics, organizers handed out 130,000 free condoms to athletes, but the supply ran out within days, forcing a rush order of 20,000 more. That record was shattered in Rio 2016, where a staggering 450,000 condoms were distributed within just 2 weeks, cementing the Olympic Games' reputation as the world's biggest orgy. In the aftermath of the Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting in 2012, first responders stumbled upon a scene of unimaginable horror. One officer later recalled, "I then walked into a room with Sergeant Cario. At first glance, it did not appear that there were any casualties. To the left of the room as you walk in, there was a bathroom in the corner. There was a massive pileup of bodies in this room. It appeared as if the teachers in the room, immediately upon hearing gunshots, began to pack children into the bathroom. Sergeant Cario began to lift bodies off the top of the pile and bring them to an open floor area. He began to look for life signs, wounds, and to attempt to find a pulse. One little girl was sitting, crouched between the toilet seat in the back corner of the room. 17 people lost their lives in that single bathroom, 15 children and 2 teachers. By then, the gunman had already murdered 9 others, and by the time it ended, 26 victims were deceased. To this day, it stands as the deadliest elementary school shooting in U.S. history. Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, evaded capture for 30 years until his arrogance finally brought him down. In 2004, apparently desperate for attention, he sent police a floppy disk after asking if it could be traced and believed them when they said no. Investigators quickly pulled metadata pointing to a computer at Christ Lutheran Church under the name Dennis, exposing the church leader and family man as the sadistic murderer who had bound, tortured, and killed his victims while hiding in plain sight. In the mid-1980s, the Thorac-25 radiation machine became infamous as one of the deadliest medical devices ever built. Designed to treat cancer patients, it instead delivered massive radiation overdoses due to several hidden software flaws and missing safety checks. Between 1985 and 1987, at least 6 patients were blasted with hundreds of times the intended dose, burning their flesh from the inside out, leaving some screaming in agony, and ultimately causing several horrific deaths. The crimes of Gary Heidnik were so horrific they inspired the character Buffalo Bill in The Silence of the Lambs. In 1986, Gary turned his Philadelphia home into a dungeon of unspeakable horrors. He abducted 6 women, chaining them in his basement pit where they endured beatings, sexual assault, starvation, and even being forced to torture each other. 2 women were killed during the ordeal, and in one of the most grotesque acts, Heidnik dismembered a victim, ground up parts of her body, and fed it to the other prisoners. While he carried out these atrocities below ground, he held church services upstairs as if nothing were wrong. Heidnik's twisted plan, according to his lawyer, was to impregnate multiple women in hopes of creating what he called a perfect race. His crimes came to light in 1987 when one captive escaped and alerted police. Heidnik was sentenced to death and executed by lethal injection in 1999, becoming the last person ever put to death in the state of Pennsylvania. In 2018, 41-year-old British traveler Amanda Gill died from diabetes complications while visiting Mexico. But when her body was flown back to the UK, her family made a horrific discovery. Her eyes, brain, heart, and other organs were missing, with only part of her lower bowel left intact. It's believed that police or hospital staff sold her organs to traffickers. This tragic gravestone from 1875 reads, Kate McCormick, seduced and pregnant by her father's friend. Unwed, she died from abortion, her only choice. Abandoned in life and death by family, with but a single rose from her mother. Buried only through the kindness of an unknown benefactor. Died February 1875, age 21. Victim of an unforgiving society. Have mercy on us. A 44-year-old man lived nearly a decade with a knife blade buried deep in his chest without even realizing it. He felt no pain, had no breathing problems, and seemed perfectly healthy, until strange pus suddenly began oozing from beneath his nipple. Doctors finally ran scans and discovered the blade had been lodged inside his body for 8 years since a stabbing, quietly encased inside of him. Doctors removed the rusted metal in a dramatic surgery, and he walked out of the hospital just 10 days later. Babe Ruth, baseball's greatest legend, lived a life steeped in excess and tragedy. Orphaned at just 7 when his parents abandoned him to a reform school, his only real father figure was a strict monk who taught him baseball. Years later, his real father died during a bloody street fight, cracking his skull on a Baltimore curb. As Ruth rose to fame, his bottomless appetite for hot dogs, whiskey, and women wrecked his health, earning him syphilis rumors and a near-death collapse in 1925 that newspapers dubbed the bellyache heard around the world, after he allegedly gorged on a dozen hot dogs and beers in one sitting before collapsing. In his final years, Babe's booming voice was silenced by a rare and brutal throat cancer, leaving him unable to eat or speak before it finally killed him at just 53 years old. When his body was laid out in Yankee Stadium, more than 77,000 fans piled past his corpse in the house that Ruth built, saying goodbye to a baseball legend who was ultimately undone by his own appetites.